Hello, hello. We're back again for Wet Ink Wednesday, and I have called up Crystal Mazur, and we're going to talk about all kinds of stuff. Crystal is one of the busiest people I know, so many projects on the go, lead developer for PIP System, teacher, just finished a big crowdfunding effort in the Black Ballad, which we might get into talking about. So, Crystal, welcome and say hello.
Hi, thank you for having me on.
Course, I love to talk to you about the many, many things that you're involved with.
I
Um,
I love to go on adventures.
you do not have the when Gandalf comes knocking, you do not make excuses. You're like, yes, sign me up.
Yep. I am definitely that hobbit that be running right towards the danger.
Excellent, excellent. So, well, this is ostensibly a series about a lot of the creators who have been part of the current Never Going Home
Yeah,
campaign. We're leading up to this video will come out pretty soon after we're recording it. We're still leading up to the launch of the funding, so this is pre-publicity. But you were involved. You've been involved with Never Going Home at every stage, basically. So you're one of
yeah,
the people who helped make what the game is, and so we had to have you back for this next round. And I just want to jump right in and hear about. Well, before we get about your specific contributions, I
yeah,
want to ask you about like the history stuff. Like I know you work in a lot of modern stuff, like you did Chicago by Night, you work in a
yeah.
lot of fantasy stuff. Like I mentioned this the second time, the Black Ballad, I'm going to keep mentioning it. Pip is all over the place, but like I don't think you've worked in a lot of like history settings, right?
Nope, not at all.
So what kind of different muscles are that work? What works and does it, I assume it appeals to you because you keep coming back for more.
Oh, I
So
will continue to come back as much as you throw at me. And I actually didn't realize just how much I liked working in history until I got the opportunity to work in Never Going Home. Um, History is not my thing. Growing up in school, history was probably like World War history and all that stuff was so hard for me to wrap my head around when it comes to remembering things and like what was important in there and how everything interconnected. The parts of history that I connect with more are like the fashion, music, like the pop culture and the social culture rather than the actual like larger global scale stuff. So when you guys asked me to write on there, I remember having that conversation with you of I don't know anything about history. And like I'm like you have every right to check me on things because I have no clue what's going on. And that's definitely changed. I feel like I when it comes to like trying to connect with that type of history, my grandfather fought in World War I, and the grandfather that I knew growing up, I had another grandfather. My other grandfather on my other side of my family was in World War I, and but I never met him. He passed away before my mom was like 12, I think. So I never met him. But I kind of drew upon like some of the stories that my grandfather told about World War II and some of the stuff that he talked about and shared with us and he was comfortable with to kind of draw that like connection to that part, those parts of history. And then I did a lot of research. I did a lot of reading. And I did a lot of like I did a lot of point of view reading. So like for the very first Never Going Home, I read the Ghosts Have Cold Hands, which is talks about Canada's involvement in World War I. Which was it was fantastic. It's written from it's basically like a documentary from the point of view of the soldiers and like what they went through and how they helped the war effort. Um and watched a lot of documentaries, dug up a whole bunch of stuff. um and did a lot of research and that kind of like scratched my academic yeah, I started doing research on everything, and that kind of like scratched my academic brain. Because I love doing research of a whole bunch of different things, especially like in the education field and stuff like that. There's a lot of stuff that you end up researching, reading, and everything like that. So that kind of connected my brain to the history part of everything and being able to wrap my head around all of that.
So what's easier to research? Is it because like once you bring in, there's a lot of primary sources created by like, the soldiers in World War I and stuff like that. So like which is easier? Is it like the all of the different vampire clans of World of Darkness? Because there's probably also a lot of content there, but
There
it
is.
in some ways it's like a smaller pool of documents. So like once you bring it into that sort of like, I mean, which one is easier to sort of like quote unquote get right, when you're dealing with the sort of like in World of Darkness where there's been so many different versions and what's canon now, and I'm sure that that's more. You've got a whole podcast about that.
Oh
Um,
yeah, yeah, I could. um I would say I think what the easiest thing is taking especially since Never Going Home is not exactly historically accurate. It is actually fairly historically accurate overall, but like there's that supernatural element that's in there,
yeah, yeah.
right? Like so that you can play around with that where like if you're getting conflicting things, that absolutely can tie into that supernatural aspect of uh where you're adding it so that you can kind of fudge it in a way that it makes sense with both possibilities happening.
Well, I like that you're almost setting up your own transition there because the duality and the of what's happening or the different narratives of like different people's versions of events is sort of what we played with a lot in the 1914 dossier, which you
Yeah,
contributed to. So tell us some more about like what you wrote. We've been doing no spoilers, but like what's
no
your
spoilers.
adventure and
Okay.
how did some of that maybe specific sources that you use to pile in to the adventure that you wrote, what's the adventure, and any stories you want to tell us about how you put it together?
Yeah. So with no spoilers, the adventuring party needs to do an escort mission on a train. And this train is filled with both people on your side, but also there are spies in there. And you have to kind of either figure out who the spy is or protect your person from that spy. Um, and the individual that they're tasked with protecting is actually a really important person in history, like a pivotal person in history. I'm not, again, no spoilers, but trying to work out the if you fail, this person dies, um and how that would play out on the bigger scale of things was something that I actually worked with Kevin Wilson on. We sat like for like an hour and a half trying to brainstorm like what happens if this guy actually does die and how does that like affect everything else. And so we came up with a really good way to have him still um be important even if things go wrong. And I feel like our the way that we worked it works really really well with the overall story and everything else on all the other pieces that fell together with that.
Yeah, I think it's I love the way that the 1914 dossier in total came together, and everybody's little piece it just leads into the next and the next and the next. It's I'm excited for it to be out there in the world.
I
So
am too. I can't wait to see people playing it. Oh, that's gonna be so cool.
well, we're definitely gonna, yeah, there's definitely some things are going to happen in that direction. So anybody
Nice.
who's watching this, watch the skies, I guess. I don't know, it'll be announced out there. So I mean, there's so many things to talk to you about, and we could talk more about history stuff if you want to. But I do want to talk to you about some of the other things that you're
Yeah.
doing. And I mentioned you have a podcast.
Yep.
It's the Darker Days Radio. You're a regular on Darker Days Radio, regular host, and
Yeah.
you've been doing for, I don't know, a couple of years now. Maybe not a couple of years, but like for a while. You've got this ongoing series of table or mentorship program is what you're calling the episodes. So it's sort of like a sub podcast within the Darker Days feed.
Yep.
And I know freelancing is kind of like one of the big things that you really focus on as you're a freelancer yourself, have been. You mentioned before to me before, like you've got so many different groups that you're working on stuff with, and you work with freelancers. So like, and that's all great. But then like you've gone this next step and done this whole like almost seminar course sort of setup kind of
Yep.
thing. uh so why, and then tell us more about it.
Okay, so first off, with Darker Days Radio, it's actually like Darker Days Radio is actually a horror podcast.
Hmm.
It was originally focused on the world of darkness. We have actually branched off into like just general horror. And then several of the other co-hosts with me are also writers. And so we focus on like the different lines that we work on because they work on different different RPG titles and everything like that than I do. I don't think we've ever actually all gotten hired on the same project yet, unless it's Pip System, because we did a Darker Days Radio themed one for Pip Primer. But so we have like a whole bunch of different branches, and this was the one that I decided to go with Darker Days Radio, because we noticed that a lot of people that were listening to specific episodes were listening because of the freelancer information that we were giving. And then this series is started Gen Con of last year. I recorded the first episode a week before Gen Con and launched it the day before Gen Con actually started, because of some of the stuff that had happened over the summer with me, specifically with another publishing company that was very, very public. And it came out that, freelancers were being taken advantage of. And it was kind of apparent to me that had someone actually sat down and talked to some of the newer freelancers that on the project about what it actually means to work on a project, and what does a good project feel like versus maybe a not so good project. If we would have had that kind of mentorship as the group, we might not have been in that situation, or we would have been able to notice that situation before everything got worse. And so I did some research into our own podcast, because one of the things that I wanted to make sure was that any of the information that we were giving out or doing or anything like that was not being monetized. So Darker Days Radio is all free. We don't have any of our podcasts modified. We actually do have some products out on drive-through that are monetized, but that's so that we can pay for like production costs and art and all of that stuff. But the podcast itself is not monetized. That was one of the big things that I wanted to make sure before I went into it, because I want that information to be out there. And like, I know that like IGDN has a mentorship program, but they only have so many people that can enter into it. And there's a much larger pool of freelancers. I want the people that can benefit most from our IGDN to be able to have that. But I also want this information to be out there and accessible, and so that people can go look at it, point to it, and be like, hey, this is actually super helpful. I didn't know this at the time, when I was starting or whatever. I wish I would have known this before.
That's awesome. And I think it's great because you've got sort of like, it's almost like out of your own, like you said, like I wish I had someone to tell me these things. So now you're being like, I know this is what a good project feels like. I like that, if do you have I mean, I don't know. I haven't listened to all the episodes. I listened to a few of these episodes where you talk about like, working with an editor, or you talked about like the one that I remember that's springing to mind is like you had like a publisher and then like a writer, and then you were kind of the freelancer in the middle, and like the three of you were all sharing like that. Maybe the first, maybe been the first one, but there
I
was
think that
definitely
was probably the first one. Yeah.
like these different voices about like sort of the sides of it, like somebody's hiring and somebody's doing the work, and you were all kind of sharing these different perspectives about what like this is what we're trying to accomplish together. It was certainly a good forum for getting, like you said, that information out there.
Yeah. And yeah, so some of the topics was like just getting into freelancing. And I have had new freelancers on as well. They're a little harder to find uh than some of the older ones. But as people stumble across the podcast and stuff like that, if they're like, hey, I want to be on it, yeah, if you have questions or whatever, that's the whole point of this, is that they are thinking coming from a perspective outside the box that we may not know about. And
Right.
so if they're confused about something, that probably is other people are confused too. But we did that. We did contract and negotiations. We did writer pay. We did like what the writing process looks like in general, because it does look different for every publishing group. But there's a general outline. It's just sometimes people call stuff differently.
Right.
Our latest one was imposter syndrome. And then I started doing writer interviews too. And so I'm going to be having more like specific writers also just interview about their process and stuff like that. So that like people, if they need a model, will have somebody.
Yeah, that sounds interesting, because you're talking about like the different writing process, and what it looks like from a publishing point of view. But I was thinking about that, I was thinking about like some people do outlining first, and some people just
Oh, we
some
talk
people
about
don't
that.
outline. Like that's a whole other, like your personal process, whether or not,
Yep.
and like the connection points between like, this is the way I typically work, but then now I've got this directive from this company that they want it done this way, and now I don't know what to do. And yeah, I mean, all of those are great topics of conversation. So yeah, I mean, it's pretty great. I didn't realize that it was born from uh I don't know, personal injury, personal slight. I thought it was more general, but it's good to know that you're, I don't know, turning it in a positive way, I guess.
It was my teacher brain taking over and going, how can I make this an opportunity for
Mm,
everyone that benefits the most people?
right.
Um, because yeah, like a lot of us writers learned a really hard lesson. And so, and I'm one of those where, okay, I internalized, I got, there was stuff that went wrong. What did I do wrong? Okay, now how am I going to process that? And this was like my way to process it and kind of work through um in a productive way.
Mm. Well, that's great. And I didn't suddenly I feel like it got real serious in here.
No, 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 no.
I
You're good. You're
but
good. You're good.
I hope it wasn't. I know you're pretty good about not saying stuff that you didn't want to say. So I
I want, yeah, like no, 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 like I'm not one to dig up drama, but I am one
right.
to use prior experience and well-known information
Mm,
as a learning experience.
right.
So that's, I mean, like, yeah, you can look me up and you'll find the stuff if you're
Right,
not
right.
sure what's
We don't
going
need to name any
on.
names, but yeah, yeah, there's not much dirt on top of that
Yeah,
that stuff yet. So it trying to end with a little bit of a lighter tone. I do want to
yeah,
ask you about any of the other stuff that you're working on that you want to give a little bit of time to. Like I
yeah,
said, I mean, again, you've got so many things. Like you're apparently you're not just like, you got your horror podcast, but you're doing like interviews, like a whole new line there again of like creator interviews and stuff like that. Whatever. What do you want to talk about that you're also involved in beyond the um
yeah. So you mentioned Black Ballad a couple of times.
I did.
I designed one of the mini games that are within the system.
Hmm.
Because basically, if you are unsure what the Black Ballad is, it is a setting where your party is all dead. And what happens afterwards? It is currently being written in the 5e mechanics. However, there are going to be translations to it into two different mechanics. I believe they're probably going to be Pathfinder 2e and possibly Savage Worlds. Um
Why not?
I why not?
Why not do them
Um
all? DCC and
I'm Pip system was thrown in there, so
right,
I will
and
probably
what's
end up still doing that and just for
mutant
fun.
the mutant engine, or
Oh yeah, mutant of
year
year
zero engine
zero.
is just out with its SRD, so you just do them all.
Yeah, just we're just gonna Pokemon it. We're gonna collect them all.
So
But
I mean, I want to ask about the mini games. You could
yeah.
tell me, what does that mean you could tell us more about the setting first, but like
Oh yeah.
what I do want to hear about, like, what does it mean to, like, I designed one of the mini games. Like, are you doing, like, your characters are doing a thing in the
Mm-hmm.
afterlife? What does that mean? Like, what do you mean by mini game?
So in the greater aspect of the world, what's happening is that in a lot of games, death actually has no meaning really because you can resurrect, right? In a
Hmm.
lot of games, this is true. Not so much Never Going Home, but
Yeah,
that's
no, that's not,
um
no gemstone worth 60,000 gold. Like, that's
right.
not part of Never Going Home.
Nope. But there there aren't a lot of consequences. So what happens when those souls keep moving back and forth between the veils of these two worlds? And what does that awaken? And then what trouble does that bring? Because that's energy being transferred between two realms in an almost consistent basis. And so the greater aspect of this is that players will eventually get to choose what happens with that type of magic within their game in future settings, should they choose to continue that. In the greater aspect of the world, you are in purgatory is essentially what it is. It's not
Right.
exactly named purgatory, but
Sure.
you are in basically a waiting area because all of these denizens and rulers of the afterlife where you go to know that at any point you could just be pulled out. So why send you to wherever you are going when you're just going to get pulled out at some point? So there's a waiting period in this area. And what ended up happening is that souls do what souls are going to do, which is they are going to try to find a way to pass the time. And from that boredom led the invention of what's called purgatory poker.
Okay.
Purgatory poker is essentially very similar to Texas Hold'em poker,
Hmm.
with the exception of instead of betting poker chips, you're betting your place in line within this waiting area.
Interesting.
So you can either try to push yourself forward and get a message out to whatever cleric you need to resurrect you and get you out of there, or push yourself further back because you don't want what's coming. And so it's basically like a way to shuffle around the order within the game. It's not anything that's required of players to play in order to advance the story. There is actually a stretch goal, and it was the very last stretch goal where we added an adventure that is specifically around purgatory poker. um so I will be hopefully working on that very soon. um but that's basically what it is. The game is optional to play, which is why
Sure.
it's called a mini game,
I
because you don't
see.
have to actually play it in order
Right.
to get the story. So,
Right.
but yeah,
Interesting.
there's a whole culture built up around it, and because of all of this and all of the trading and the souls that the soul coins that they were getting and all of that stuff, like an entire economy basically bloomed. out from under the birth of this game. So
I mean, this is of course you get like two or three people together in a room and they're going to invent a game with like,
yeah.
like the I've got a button and here's a blade of grass and we're going to play a game now, like
Yeah, you're gonna
especially
MacGyver a game together. Yeah.
right, especially if you're, there for 10,000 years or whatever, subjective reality.
Yep.
Uh all right, well that sounds amazing and that's like in the works. Is it got
It's
a
currently in the works.
estimate
Yep.
like you know release date, or is it too soon after the closing of the
I know that
funding
there's
to
an estimated release date, I think. And I believe it's either end of this year or the beginning of next year.
okay.
We are, I mean, like the writing is currently going on right now. Most of the big writing portions are already done.
Yeah,
It's now all of the smaller little pieces that need to get fit in.
right. Awesome. Well, Crystal, thank you so much for your time today to talk to us about all these different things that you're involved with. And please tell the viewers here where they can find you if they want to see more of what you're up to.
Yeah. So you can either find me at my website, which is thegeekypanda.com. Or you can find me on all social medias at Body and Soul 152.
That's there you go. That's pretty short and sweet. So great. Thank you again for talking to me, and we'll see you at the next con.
Yeah, see you at the next con. Bye.
Bye bye.